Prophet Song opens with a knock on the door, and that small domestic interruption tells you almost everything about the book's method. The terror does not begin on a battlefield but in a family home, where Eilish Stack is confronted by officers asking about her husband, Larry. Lynch starts with intrusion because the novel is about how authoritarianism enters ordinary life before people are willing to name it. Larry matters because he is not a glamorous dissident but a teacher and trade union leader, a man connected to civic process and collective rights. When the new regime targets someone like him, the novel signals that Ireland is no longer merely politically unstable, it is moving into a system where democratic action itself can be treated as subversion. Once Larry is arrested and then effectively vanished, the Stack family enters a new reality defined by uncertainty. Eilish is not given a clean fact she can mourn or act upon, she is given silence, delay, and bureaucratic fog. That matters because disappearance in the novel is not just physical removal but the destruction of reliable knowledge. Eilish's first response is to believe that the system must still contain limits. She assumes there will be procedures, pressure, consequences, and eventually correction. Lynch makes this hesitation central because the novel is deeply interested in denial, not stupidity, but the ordinary human habit of trusting yesterday's rules after power has already changed them. As emergency powers harden into permanent rule, Ireland slides into dictatorship and then civil war. The Garda gains sweeping authority, a secret police force operates with impunity, and public life is reorganized around fear. One of the book's strengths is that this collapse feels gradual while it is happening and total only once it is already too late. Eilish becomes the novel's center not because she seeks history, but because history invades her home and refuses to leave. She has to feed children, keep their household functioning, care for her father, and somehow continue making practical decisions while every institutional support begins to rot. In that sense, the novel is political, but it is experienced through domestic labor and maternal endurance. Her father, Simon, gives the novel one of its most resonant symbolic layers. His dementia mirrors a society losing its continuity with its own values, its memory of freedom, and its sense of what is normal. Yet his moments of lucidity also carry moral force, because he can still recognize what Eilish resists admitting: the country is no longer safe, and waiting will not reverse it. Simon also symbolizes attachment to place. He belongs to a world of routines, rooms, memories, and family geography, which makes the idea of leaving feel like a kind of spiritual amputation. When he eventually goes to Canada to live with Aine, the novel shows that exile is not only a practical act of survival but also a surrender of the life that made a person feel located in the world. Aine, watching from Canada, represents the clarity of distance. From outside the collapsing state, the danger is easier to see and easier to name, and she urges Eilish to leave. Through this contrast, Lynch shows one of the novel's harshest truths: the people trapped inside a crisis often cannot see it as clearly as those observing from elsewhere. The children turn public collapse into intimate stakes. Mark, the eldest, is old enough to be claimed by history. Molly and Bailey are still suspended between dependence and growing awareness. Baby Ben represents life at its most vulnerable. Their presence ensures that every political development in the book is also a question of food, shelter, medicine, safety, and the future of bodies that cannot protect themselves. Mark's storyline is crucial because the regime eventually reaches into the family and demands not just obedience but possession. He is called up for military service, refuses, goes into hiding, and drifts toward the rebels. Through him, the novel shows how authoritarian states consume the future by trying to absorb the young into war, ideology, and sacrifice. Lynch does not romanticize Mark's path into resistance. The rebels may stand against tyranny, but rebellion is not shown as clean or heroic in any simple way. Instead, the book presents resistance as one more force that tears families apart, turning private love into public risk and pulling sons out of the household into the machinery of conflict. As the regime tightens its grip, Eilish finds that institutions no longer function as institutions, only as facades. Offices, requests, inquiries, and procedures remain, but they no longer produce justice or truth. Bureaucracy becomes one of the novel's darkest symbols, a modern form of violence that hides coercion behind forms, records, and official language. At the same time, Eilish's social and professional world begins to shrink. She is isolated, pressured, and cut off, while the family home itself becomes less a refuge than a shrinking pocket of temporary order. Lynch is careful here. Authoritarian collapse is not only spectacular violence, but the steady narrowing of where one can go, who one can trust, and what kind of future one can still imagine. The novel's style intensifies this suffocation. Lynch uses long, pressurized sentences, very few paragraph breaks, and dialogue without quotation marks, creating a reading experience that feels breathless and enclosed. This is not decorative experimentation. The form itself enacts the loss of space, clarity, and relief that defines Eilish's life. As fighting spreads and Dublin becomes a war zone, the family's logic of staying put begins to collapse. What once looked like patience starts to look like entrapment. The city's transformation matters symbolically too. A familiar Western capital becomes the kind of shattered landscape many readers are used to seeing only on foreign news footage. Bailey's injury marks one of the book's great descents into horror. He is hit by shrapnel during the fighting, and Eilish struggles to get him to a hospital through a city that no longer protects civilians. The sequence is devastating because it reveals that even a wounded child no longer occupies sacred ground beyond politics. When Bailey is moved to a military hospital and then effectively disappears from the system, the novel strips away one of Eilish's last illusions. Her search ends not in care or explanation but in the morgue, where she finds his tortured body. Here the state is shown at its most obscene. It does not merely kill, it processes, conceals, and bureaucratizes atrocity. Bailey's death is the moral breaking point of the novel. Up to then, Eilish has been sustained by delay, hope, and habit, but this loss makes continued belief in recovery feel impossible. The family can no longer survive by pretending the old world might return. Survival now requires admitting that it is gone. From this point, the novel turns from endurance to flight. Eilish gathers her remaining children and joins the mass movement of civilians trying to escape northward with money Ain has provided. The book's perspective shifts here in a crucial way. The stakes are no longer people who hear about refugee crises, but people inside one. That reversal is one of Lynch's central aims. He has said the novel was shaped by thinking about Syria, the refugee crisis, unrest in Western democracies, and the author's opinion that many lack empathy toward displaced people. By relocating those pressures into Ireland, he forces the reader to experience from within what is often kept at a moral distance. The sea becomes the novel's final major symbol. In many stories it suggests freedom, openness, or possibility, but here it is bound to exile, danger, and desperate hope. At the end, the movement toward the sea is not romantic escape, it is the last fragile threshold between annihilation and survival. The title prophet's song fits this structure of warning and lament. The book feels prophetic not because it predicts one specific future, but because it stages a recurring human pattern. Rights erode, people normalize the erosion, and by the time they fully understand what has changed, they are already living inside catastrophe. Their song, part of the title, suggests that this warning is also a sustained cry of grief. The novel's deeper symbolism also runs through bodies and systems. Eilish, as a scientist and mother, moves through a world where both the human body and the body politic are under assault: wounded children, exhausted caregivers, disappeared prisoners, a state whose internal organs have turned against its own people. Lynch keeps reminding us that political collapse is never abstract for long, it is felt in nerves, hunger, fear, injury, and grief. In the end, Prophet's Song is a novel about how democracy dies at the scale of a household. It is about denial, love, memory, terror, exile, and the terrible speed with which the unthinkable becomes normal. More than anything, it is a demand for empathy, not that readers merely understand collapse intellectually, but that they feel how a family can be transformed, step by step, into the very people the world prefers to call strangers. That's all for now. Let us know in the comments what books you'd like to see us summarize next. If you would like to learn more, check the video description or explore our other videos. Happy learning, we hope to see you in the next video.